My name is Serena Walsh. I'm 29, and last Tuesday changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. I was sitting in my childhood living room watching my golden boy brother Marcus throw the most spectacular tantrum I'd ever witnessed. And trust me, growing up with him gave me plenty of experience with his outbursts. But this wasn't about a denied toy or missed opportunity. This was about $28 million that he somehow believed should have been his. The way his face contorted when our family lawyer read my grandmother's will, the pure hatred in his eyes when he realized that the failure sister had inherited everything, while he got nothing, that moment shattered every assumption our family had built over 3 decades. What he didn't know was that Grandma Rose had been watching, planning, and documenting everything for years. But before I tell you how my perfect brother's world came crashing down, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Are you Team Serena, or do you think family money should be shared equally? Hit that like button if you've ever been the overlooked sibling, and make sure to subscribe because this story gets wild. Trust me, you won't believe what my grandmother had been hiding, or how perfectly she orchestrated the ultimate family justice. Let's dive into how the golden child finally got what he deserved. Growing up in the Walsh household was like living in 2 different realities simultaneously. In one reality, there was Marcus, 6 years older, naturally gifted, and absolutely everything my parents had dreamed of in a son. In the other reality, there was me, the afterthought, the disappointment, the daughter who could never quite measure up to perfection incarnate. Marcus received his first car at 16, a brand new BMW that Dad proudly declared was an investment in his future. When I turned 16, I got a lecture about responsibility and a bus pass. Marcus attended private schools from kindergarten through his MBA at Wharton, each institution more prestigious than the last. I fought tooth and nail for state school tuition, working 3 jobs to supplement what little my parents grudgingly contributed. The favoritism wasn't subtle, it was brazen, unapologetic, and utterly systematic. Family dinners revolved around Marcus's achievements, his latest promotion at the consulting firm, his girlfriend from the right family, his investment portfolio that Dad helped him build with seed money I could only dream of. When I tried to share my own accomplishments, my marketing degree earned with honors, my slow but steady climb up the corporate ladder, the conversation would inevitably pivot back to whatever Marcus was doing. "Serena's doing fine," Mom would say with that particular tone. That made fine sound like barely adequate. "But did you hear about Marcus's new client, Fortune 500 company, huge contract?" The patterns became so predictable I could script them. Marcus would arrive for Sunday dinner in whatever luxury car he was driving that month, always impeccably dressed, always with stories of success and recognition. I'd arrive in my reliable but aging Honda, usually straight from working weekend hours, and watch as my parents' faces lit up for him in ways they never did for me. What hurt most wasn't the material disparity though. Watching my brother casually spend more on dinner than I made in a week stung. It was the emotional investment or lack thereof. Dad knew Marcus's golf handicap but couldn't remember what company I worked for. Mom could recite Marcus's girlfriend's pedigree but had never asked about my relationship status. They attended every one of Marcus's company events but missed my promotion celebration because it conflicted with Marcus's tennis tournament. The crazy part, I genuinely loved my brother for years. Despite everything, I looked up to him, made excuses for him, defended him when friends pointed out how obviously favored he was. "He's older," I'd say. "He's the firstborn. He's naturally more ambitious." I convinced myself that the disparity was somehow fair, that I simply hadn't earned the same level of investment and attention. Marcus, for his part, seemed to accept this arrangement as the natural order of things. He'd ruffle my hair and call me "little sis," with the casual affection of someone who'd never questioned their place at the top of the family hierarchy. He'd offer to help me out financially with a patronizing air of nobility, bestowing charity. When I started earning decent money in my late 20s, he'd make jokes about my cute little career and ask when I was going to find a husband to take care of me properly. But there was one person who saw through it all: Grandma Rose. Grandma Rose was Dad's mother, a sharp-eyed woman who'd built her own fortune through decades of shrewd real estate investments and business decisions. She lived in an elegant brownstone across town, maintaining her independence well into her 80s. Unlike my parents, she paid attention to everything and everyone with equal intensity. I remember the first time she really saw me. Really saw me. I was 14, sitting alone at Marcus's high school graduation party, while he held court with admirers. She sat down beside me and asked what I was reading. When I showed her my worn copy of The Outsiders, she didn't dismiss it or suggest I should be socializing. Instead, she asked thoughtful questions about the themes, listened to my analysis, and told me she was impressed by my insights. That conversation led to regular visits to her brownstone, where she'd make tea, and we'd talk about books, current events, and life in general. She was the first adult who seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions. She never compared me to Marcus or suggested I should be more like him. Instead, she encouraged my interests, celebrated my small victories, and treated me like an individual worthy of respect and attention. During those afternoon visits, I began to understand that Grandma Rose was documenting more than I realized. She'd ask casual questions about family dynamics, about how my parents treated Marcus versus me, about specific incidents and conversations. At the time, I thought she was just being a caring grandmother. I had no idea she was building a case. The summer before my senior year of high school, something shifted. Grandma Rose started talking about fairness, about the difference between equality and equity, about how family, wealth, and support should nurture all children, not just the obviously gifted ones. She'd share stories about her own siblings, about favoritism in her childhood family, about the long-term damage such dynamics could cause. "Serena," she told me one afternoon as we sat in her garden, "never let anyone convince you that love is a limited resource. A parent who claims they can't support two children equally is making a choice, not facing a constraint." Those words stayed with me through years of watching Marcus receive opportunities I could only imagine. They sustained me through countless family gatherings where I felt invisible, through graduation ceremonies where my parents' enthusiasm was measurably different, through holiday celebrations that felt more like Marcus appreciation festivals. What I didn't know was that Grandma Rose was keeping meticulous records of every slight, every disparity, every moment when family resources flowed toward Marcus while I was left to fend for myself. She was planning something extraordinary, something that would finally balance the scales in ways I never could have imagined. By my mid-20s, I'd convinced myself I'd escaped the family dynamics that had defined my childhood. I was living in my own apartment across town, building my career in digital marketing and maintaining what I thought was a healthy distance from the Marcus-centric universe of my parents' world. I told myself I'd found peace with being the overlooked daughter, that I'd built something meaningful independent of their approval or support. But families have a way of pulling you back into their gravitational field, especially when major events demand your presence. Marcus's engagement to Vivian Ashworth, daughter of old money, social connections, and everything my parents had dreamed of in a daughter-in-law, was definitely a major event requiring family solidarity and celebration. The engagement party was held at the country club where Marcus and Dad played golf, a venue that screamed established wealth and social positioning. I arrived in my best dress, a simple black number I'd splurged on for work events, and immediately felt underdressed among the sea of designer gowns and tailored suits. Vivian looked stunning in something that probably cost more than my monthly salary, while Marcus played the part of the successful young executive to perfection. I found myself relegated to the family table's least prominent seat, making small talk with distant relatives while Marcus and Vivian worked the room like political candidates. Dad gave a speech about his son's achievements and bright future, painting a picture of Marcus as a self-made success story that conveniently omitted the substantial financial support that had made that success possible. Mom beamed with pride as she described the wedding plans, a lavish affair that would properly introduce Vivian to our family. What struck me most wasn't the celebration itself, but the casual assumptions everyone made about family resources and support. When talk turned to the down payment on Marcus and Vivian's future home, Dad mentioned the family contribution as if it were the most natural thing in the world. When someone asked about the wedding budget, Mom laughed and said they were investing in their children's happiness. No one asked about my life, my career progress, or my own relationship status. I'd been dating David, a fellow marketing professional, for over a year, but the family showed zero interest in meeting him or acknowledging his existence. When I tried to mention a recent promotion at work, the conversation quickly shifted back to Marcus's latest client acquisition or Vivian's charity work. But Grandma Rose was different that night. She seemed to be watching everything with unusual intensity, taking mental notes of every interaction, every slight, every moment when family resources were discussed, as if they naturally flowed in one direction only. When I sat down beside her during dinner, she squeezed my hand and said something that seemed oddly specific at the time. "Serena dear, sometimes patience is the most powerful virtue. Sometimes waiting for the right moment to act is worth decades of preparation." I thought she was offering general life advice, the kind of wisdom elderly relatives share at family gatherings. I had no idea she was previewing a plan years in the making. The months following Marcus's engagement brought an intensification of family dynamics I thought I'd escaped. Wedding planning consumed every family gathering with detailed discussions of venues, guest lists, and expenses that made my head spin. The wedding budget alone exceeded what I'd earned in my entire career to that point, yet it was discussed as a reasonable investment in family prestige and Marcus's future. I found myself increasingly uncomfortable with family events, feeling like an outsider, observing someone else's life from the margins. Marcus had evolved from golden child to family prince, his opinions solicited on everything from Dad's business decisions to Mom's redecorating plans. Meanwhile, my presence seemed almost optional, acknowledged with perfunctory politeness, but never sought out or valued. The wedding itself was everything my parents had dreamed of. Elegant, expensive, and perfectly calibrated to announce the family's social status. I served as a bridesmaid in a dress I couldn't afford, smiling through photos that would become family treasures while feeling like a background extra in someone else's movie. The reception featured speeches about Marcus's bright future, Vivian's wonderful family, and the next generation of success and prosperity. What I didn't realize was that Grandma Rose was using the wedding as a final opportunity to document family dynamics. She watched as Marcus and Vivian received an avalanche of generous gifts from extended family, as my parents announced their contribution to the couple's new home, as everyone celebrated the golden child's transition to married life with the enthusiasm typically reserved for royal weddings. And she watched as I sat alone at the singles table, having been separated from the family tables to make room for Vivian's extensive social circle. She noted how my parents introduced Marcus and Vivian to everyone as our successful children while barely mentioning my existence to wedding guests. She observed how family resources, attention, and emotional investment flowed in one direction while I remained invisible despite being blood family. After the wedding, I thought I'd reached a new level of peace with family dynamics. I told myself I'd moved beyond needing their approval or recognition. I focused on my career, my relationship with David, and building a life that didn't depend on family validation or support. I convinced myself that being overlooked was actually freedom from expectations, from family politics, from the pressure to conform to their vision of success. But Grandma Rose knew something I didn't. She was dying, and she had one final move to make in a game I hadn't even realized she was playing. The cancer diagnosis came suddenly in the spring. Pancreatic cancer, aggressive and advanced with a prognosis measured in months rather than years. Grandma Rose handled the news with characteristic dignity, refusing treatment that would extend suffering without meaningfully extending life. Instead, she focused on what she called putting her affairs in order. I visited her more frequently during those final months, sometimes stopping by after work or spending weekend afternoons in her garden. She seemed peaceful but purposeful, as if she were completing an important project rather than simply waiting for the end. She'd ask detailed questions about my life, my work, my relationship, my hopes for the future. She wanted to know about my struggles with student loans, my careful budgeting to afford my apartment, my determination to build something meaningful despite the lack of family support. She also asked about Marcus, but in a different way. She wanted to know about his lifestyle, his spending habits, his assumptions about money and family resources. She asked about specific incidents from our childhood, about moments when the favoritism had been particularly obvious or painful. At the time, I thought she was simply trying to understand family dynamics before she passed away. I had no idea she was conducting final interviews for the most important decision of her life. The last conversation I had with Grandma Rose was on a Thursday afternoon in late summer. She was weak but alert, sitting in her favorite chair with legal documents spread across the side table. She told me she loved me, that she was proud of the woman I'd become, and that sometimes justice takes patience but always arrives eventually. "Serena," she said, holding my hand with surprising strength, "never doubt your worth. Never let anyone convince you that being overlooked means being less valuable. Sometimes the quiet ones, the ones who build their strength without fanfare, are the ones who deserve the greatest recognition." She died peacefully the following Tuesday, surrounded by family who had finally gathered to pay their respects. Marcus delivered a beautiful eulogy about her strength, wisdom, and love for family. My parents spoke about her role as family matriarch and her influence on multiple generations. I sat quietly in the front row, grieving the loss of the one person who had truly seen and valued me for who I was. None of us knew that her greatest act of love and justice was waiting to be revealed. The family meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at Grandma Rose's brownstone. Her attorney, Mr. Harrison Blackwell, had requested all immediate family members be present for the reading of the will. It seemed like a formality. Everyone assumed the estate would be divided among my father and his siblings, with perhaps some sentimental items distributed to grandchildren. Marcus arrived in his newest acquisition, a sleek Mercedes that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. He was discussing market trends with Dad, while Mom fussed over the arrangements, making sure everyone had appropriate refreshments for what we all assumed would be a brief, straightforward proceeding. Vivian sat elegantly beside Marcus, offering condolences with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to social obligations. I had driven over in my reliable Honda after finishing up a project deadline, still wearing my work clothes, and feeling slightly disheveled compared to everyone else's formal attire. As usual, I found myself sitting slightly apart from the main family cluster, observing rather than fully participating in the pre-meeting conversations. Mr. Day. Blackwell arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the serious expression of someone about to deliver important news. He was an elderly gentleman who had handled Grandma Rose's legal affairs for decades, and he seemed unusually formal as he arranged his documents on her dining room table. "Thank you all for coming," he began, adjusting his glasses and surveying the assembled family. "Rose Walsh left very specific instructions for this meeting, and I'm here to execute her final wishes exactly as she documented them." He started with smaller bequests, family photos to various relatives, some jewelry to female cousins, her beloved books to the local library. Marcus looked politely interested, but clearly was waiting for the main event, the distribution of her substantial estate. Everyone knew Grandma Rose had accumulated significant wealth through her real estate investments and business ventures, though the exact amount had always been a family mystery. "Now, Mr. Blackwell continued, we come to the primary estate distribution. Rose Walsh's total net worth at the time of her death was approximately $31.2 million, consisting of real estate holdings, investment portfolios, business interests, and liquid assets. A murmur went through the room. Even though we'd known she was wealthy, the specific number was staggering. Marcus straightened in his chair, no doubt calculating his likely inheritance as the firstborn grandchild and family golden boy. Dad and his siblings exchanged glances, clearly processing the magnitude of what they were about to inherit. "The will contains some unusual provisions, Mr. Blackwell said, and something in his tone made me look up from my hands. Rose Walsh spent considerable time documenting her reasoning for these decisions, and she specifically requested that I read her explanatory letter before announcing the distributions. He cleared his throat and began reading from a letter written in Grandma Rose's distinctive handwriting. To my beloved family gathered here today, I want you to understand that every decision I've made regarding my estate reflects careful observation and deep love for all of you. However, love sometimes requires difficult choices, especially when patterns of favoritism and inequity have been allowed to persist for too long. For 30 years, I have watched as Marcus received every advantage, every opportunity, and every form of family support, while Serena was systematically overlooked, undervalued, and left to succeed or fail on her own merit. I have documented countless instances where family resources flowed toward the golden child, while the equally deserving daughter was treated as an afterthought. Marcus has never known struggle, never faced real obstacles, never had to prove his worth without a safety net. He received private school education, college support, career connections, and ongoing financial assistance that allowed him to build what appears to be success, but is actually privilege disguised as achievement. Serena, by contrast, has earned everything through her own determination, intelligence, and character. She worked multiple jobs to pay for college, built her career without family connections, and maintained her dignity and kindness despite being treated as less worthy of family investment. The room had gone completely silent. Marcus's face was transitioning from confusion to something darker while my parents looked stunned. I felt like I was watching a movie, unable to process that my grandmother had been documenting and analyzing our family dynamics with such precision. Mr. Blackwell continued reading. Therefore, after careful consideration and with complete conviction in the fairness of this decision, I leave the entirety of my estate, $28.4 million after taxes, and specific bequests to my granddaughter Serena Walsh. She has proven her character, her resilience, and her worth without any family advantage. This inheritance is not charity, it is long overdue recognition and justice. To Marcus, I leave my father's pocket watch, and my sincere hope that this experience will teach him the value of earning rather than expecting. To my son Robert and his wife Patricia, I leave nothing beyond my disappointment in your failure to love and support your children equally. Your favoritism created a dynamic that benefited no one and harmed everyone. Serena used this inheritance to build something beautiful, to support causes you believe in, and to remember that being overlooked by people who should have known better was never a reflection of your worth. The silence following the letter stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. I stared at Mr. Blackwell, certain I had misheard or misunderstood something fundamental. $28.4 million. To me, the family disappointment, the overlooked daughter, the one who had never mattered enough to invest in. Marcus was the first to break the silence, and when he did, it was explosive. "This is impossible," he said, his voice rising to a pitch I'd never heard before. She was clearly not in her right mind. "This will has to be contested. There's no way, absolutely no way that Serena deserves that inheritance. I'm the one who visited regularly, who brought Vivian to meet her, who respected family traditions." His face was flushed, red veins visible on his forehead as he processed what had just happened. This was a man who had never been denied anything significant in his entire life, who had assumed family wealth would naturally flow toward him as it always had, who couldn't comprehend a world where his little sister, the afterthought, the disappointment, would be chosen over him. "Marcus," Mr. Blackwell said calmly, "I can assure you that Rose Walsh was completely lucid and legally competent when she made these decisions. The will was updated just 3 months ago after extensive consultation and careful deliberation. She anticipated potential challenges and took numerous steps to ensure her wishes would be legally protected. But Marcus wasn't listening to legal explanations. He was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, pure rage mixed with disbelief and something that looked uncomfortably like hatred. This was his inheritance, his birthright, his natural due as the golden child. The idea that it would go to me instead violated every assumption he'd made about his place in the family hierarchy. "Serena doesn't even need that money," he shouted, gesturing wildly. "She's fine on her own, she's always been independent. I'm the one with real responsibilities, real expenses, a wife to support, a lifestyle to maintain. This doesn't make any sense." And that's when I realized something profound. Marcus genuinely believed he deserved the inheritance. More than I did. Not because he'd earned it, not because he'd been a better grandchild, but simply because he had always been the favored one. In his mind, family resources naturally belonged to him, and any deviation from that pattern was an injustice that needed to be corrected. The golden child was learning what it felt like to be overlooked, and he was not handling it well. What happened next will forever be burned into my memory as the moment our family's careful facade finally crumbled completely. Marcus's initial outburst was just the beginning, a preview of the volcanic eruption of entitlement and rage that followed. "This is theft," he screamed, jumping up from his chair so violently that it toppled backward. "Serena manipulated her. She spent all that time visiting just to get her hands on the money. This is elder abuse, financial manipulation. I don't know what legal term applies, but this is criminal." I sat frozen, watching my brother transform into someone I didn't recognize. His face had gone from red to purple, spit flying as he gestured wildly, his usually perfect composure shattered into pieces. Vivian looked mortified, reaching out to try to calm him down, but he shook her off with an irritated gesture. "Marcus, please," Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was processing his own disappointment while trying to manage his son's meltdown. Mom looked between Marcus and me, as if trying to understand how her family hierarchy had been so completely upended. "Don't please me," Marcus roared at Dad. "Where were you when this was happening? How did you let Serena worm her way into Grandma's head like this? She's been playing the victim for years, making everyone feel sorry for her, and now she's cashed in on it." Mr. Blackwell cleared his throat. "I feel I should mention that Rose Walsh's letter contains additional documentation. She kept detailed records of family financial support over the years, including copies of checks, bank transfers, and receipts. She documented every advantage provided to Marcus, and every time Serena was overlooked or denied similar support." "I don't care about her documentation," Marcus yelled. She was an old woman who got confused about fairness. Just because Serena had to work her way through college doesn't mean she deserves to steal my inheritance. Your inheritance. I finally spoke, my voice quiet but carrying clearly through the room. "Since when was Grandma Rose's money automatically yours?" Marcus whirled around to face me, and for a moment I genuinely wondered if he might become physical. The hatred in his eyes was unlike anything I'd ever seen directed at me or really at anyone. This was the look of someone whose entire worldview had just been shattered. "Since I'm the one who matters," he shouted. "Since I'm the one who built something meaningful with my life. Since I'm the one who represents this family's values and future, you're nobody, Serena. You work at some nobody company doing nobody work, living in your nobody apartment. I'm the success story. I'm the one people respect." The words hit like physical blows, but something strange happened. Instead of feeling devastated, I felt oddly calm. For the first time in my life, I was seeing Marcus without any filters, without the family mythology that had surrounded him since childhood. This tantrum, this explosion of entitlement and rage, was showing me exactly who my brother really was, underneath all the polish and privilege. "Listen to yourself," I said quietly. "Listen to what you're actually saying. You think you deserve Grandma's money because you matter more than I do. Because your life is more important than mine. Because you've always gotten everything, so you should continue getting everything. Yes, he screamed, apparently not hearing how that sounded. That's exactly what I'm saying. This family invested in me because I was worth investing in. They saw potential in me that they didn't see in you, and now you want to steal the rewards of that investment. Mom finally found her voice. Marcus, sweetheart, maybe you should calm down. And don't tell me to calm down. He rounded on her with the same fury he'd directed at me. You created this situation, you and Dad. You treated her like she was special for being independent, like it was admirable that she didn't need help, and somehow that convinced Grandma that she deserved to be rewarded for it. Maybe I said standing up for the first time since. The will reading began. The problem isn't that I was treated as special for being independent. Maybe the problem is that you were never required to be independent at all. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language, genuinely unable to comprehend the concept that his lifetime of advantages might not have been automatically deserved. You have no idea what pressure I've been under, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You have no idea what it's like to carry family expectations, to represent family success, to be responsible for maintaining family reputation and status. You got to coast through life without any real responsibilities or expectations. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Marcus, you got handed everything. Every opportunity, every advantage, every safety net. You never had to prove yourself, because you never had to face real consequences. The pressure you felt was the mild discomfort of living up to expectations when you had every possible resource to meet them. I earned everything I have, he exploded again. My education, my career, my success, I worked for all of it, with private school education paid for by the family, with college tuition paid for by the family, with career connections provided by Dad, with ongoing financial support whenever you needed it, with a safety net that meant you never faced real consequences for failure. I felt 30 years of overlooked pain crystallizing into clarity. You've never earned anything on your own merit, Marcus. You've just been really good at accepting advantages while convincing yourself you deserve them. That's when he said the thing that revealed everything. Well, at least now we know who the real gold digger in this family is. The accusation hung in the air like poison. My brother, who had accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in family support over the years, without question, was calling me a gold digger for inheriting money from a grandmother who had loved and supported me when no one else would. Vivian, who had been silent throughout the entire explosion, finally spoke. Marcus, maybe we should go home and process this privately. Process what he snapped at his wife. Process the fact that my inheritance was stolen by my manipulative sister. Process the fact that my own family was fooled by 30 years of victim playing Mr. Blackwell had been watching this entire exchange with professional detachment, but now he spoke again. I have one more document to share. Rose Walsh specifically anticipated this reaction and left a sealed letter to be opened only if family members contested the will or accused Serena of manipulation. He opened another envelope and began reading, "If you are hearing this letter, it means my family has responded to my final act of justice with exactly the entitlement and rage I expected. To anyone who claims Serena manipulated me, she never asked for anything. She never mentioned money or inheritance. She simply treated me with the love and respect that others took for granted, while offering nothing in return. To Marcus specifically, your reaction to being treated the way you've treated Serena your entire life is proving every point I made in my will. Your inability to accept that someone else might deserve recognition and support reveals the depth of your selfishness and entitlement. This inheritance is not being given to Serena because she needs it. It's being given to her because she's earned it through character, resilience, and grace under pressure that none of you ever acknowledged or valued." By the time Mr. Blackwell finished reading, Marcus was shaking with rage. He looked around the room as if seeking allies, but everyone else seemed stunned into silence by the magnitude of his meltdown and the precision of Grandma Rose's posthumous observations. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I will contest this will. I will prove she was manipulated. I will make sure justice is served." And then he stormed out, Vivian hurrying after him, leaving the rest of us sitting in the wreckage of 30 years of family dysfunction that had finally been exposed for exactly what it was. I looked around at my parents, at Mr. Blackwell, at the legal documents that had just made me one of the wealthiest people in the state, and realized that Grandma Rose had given me something far more valuable than money. She had given me the truth. The next few months turned into a legal and emotional battlefield that would have been devastating if I hadn't finally understood what I was really fighting for. Marcus hired the most expensive law firm in the city and immediately filed to contest the will, claiming undue influence, diminished capacity, and fraud. His legal team launched an investigation designed to prove that I had manipulated an elderly woman into changing her will. What they discovered instead was a paper trail that documented 30 years of family favoritism with brutal precision. Marcus's lawyers demanded access to all of Grandma Rose's financial records, medical records, and personal documents. They interviewed her doctors, her financial advisors, her housekeeper, and anyone else who had regular contact with her in her final years. They were looking for evidence of cognitive decline, signs of manipulation, or proof that I had pressured her into making changes that benefited me. Instead, they found a woman who had been meticulously documenting family dynamics since Marcus and I were children. The medical records showed no signs of cognitive impairment or diminished capacity. Her doctors testified that she had been sharp, engaged, and completely lucid up until her death. Her financial advisor confirmed that she had been actively managing her investments and making sophisticated financial decisions right up to the end. But the most damaging evidence came from Grandma Rose's personal files. She had kept copies of every check, every bank transfer, every financial gift that my parents had given to Marcus over the years. The total amount was staggering, over $800, 0 inches direct financial support, not counting the private school, tuition, college expenses, or the down payment assistance for his house. She had documentation showing that I had received less than $5, 0 inches family financial support over the same time period. She had saved birthday cards, graduation announcements, and family photos that told the story of differential treatment with heartbreaking clarity. Marcus's graduation photos showed him surrounded by proud family members at expensive celebration dinners. My graduation photos showed me alone, or with one or two relatives, at modest gatherings that were clearly afterthoughts. She had kept a journal documenting family gatherings, noting conversations, interactions, and the patterns of attention and support that had shaped our childhoods. Entries like Christmas 1998, Robert and Patricia spent 45 minutes discussing Marcus's college applications and scholarship opportunities. Serena's academic achievements mentioned only in passing. Clear pattern of investment in male child continues. Marcus's birthday 2003. Family dinner at country club, expensive gifts, extended celebration. Serena's birthday same year, cake at home, modest gift celebration cut short for Marcus's tennis tournament. Family vacation 2007. Marcus brought friend given own room activities planned around his interests. Serena shared room with cousin, no input on itinerary. Parents paid for Marcus's friend's expenses but questioned Serena's request for spending money. Page after page of observations that painted a picture of systematic favoritism that had been so normalized by our family that they didn't even recognize it as abnormal. The journal entries weren't bitter or angry, they were clinical, factual documentation of patterns that had persisted for decades. Marcus's legal team also discovered that Grandma Rose had been quietly supporting my education and career in ways I'd never known about. She had anonymously funded a scholarship that had helped pay for my final year of college. She had written recommendation letters for job applications using her business connections to open doors I didn't even realize she was opening. She had been investing in my success all along, just quietly and without fanfare. The investigation revealed something else. Marcus's financial situation wasn't as solid as it appeared. Despite his high salary and family support, he was living significantly beyond his means. The luxury cars, expensive clothes, and lavish lifestyle were being funded by credit cards and loans that he'd assumed would eventually be covered by his inheritance. He owed over $200, 0 consumer debt, and had been counting on Grandma Rose's money to maintain his lifestyle. Meanwhile, my own financial records showed consistent saving, responsible spending, and gradual but steady progress toward financial stability. I was living within my means, building an emergency fund, and planning for the future without expecting any inheritance or family support. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. 6 months into the legal battle, Marcus's case began falling apart. His lawyers couldn't find any evidence of manipulation or undue influence. The medical evidence supported Grandma Rose's mental competency. The financial records showed a clear pattern of differential family treatment that justified her decision. But Marcus wasn't ready to give up. As his legal case weakened, his personal attacks intensified. He started spreading rumors through extended family that I had isolated Grandma Rose from other family members, that I had poisoned her mind against him, that I had been plotting this inheritance grab for years. He painted himself as the victim of elaborate conspiracy designed to steal his rightful inheritance. Some relatives believed him. Others began questioning family dynamics they'd never really examined before. Thanksgiving dinner that year was tense, with family members taking sides and rehashing decades of perceived slights and favoritism. But something interesting happened during those family confrontations. Other relatives started sharing their own observations about the differential treatment Marcus and I had received. Aunts and uncles mentioned conversations they'd had with Grandma Rose about family fairness. Cousins recalled instances where the favoritism had been so obvious that they'd felt uncomfortable. My cousin Jennifer, who was close to my age, pulled me aside during one family gathering and said, "Serena, I've watched this dynamic my whole life. Everyone could see how differently you and Marcus were treated. Grandma Rose was the only one brave enough to actually do something about it." The legal battle stretched into the following year, but Marcus's position grew weaker with each passing month. His lawyers finally advised him that he had virtually no chance of winning and was likely to face significant legal fees if he continued the challenge. That's when he made one final desperate attempt to pressure me into sharing the inheritance. He showed up at my apartment on a Tuesday evening, looking haggard and defeated in a way I'd never seen before. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him until he started talking. "Serena, this has gone far enough," he said, pushing past me into my living room. "You've made your point. You've gotten your revenge for whatever imagined slights you think you suffered growing up. But this is destroying our family, and it needs to stop." "Imagined slights," I repeated, genuinely amazed that he still didn't understand what had happened. "Okay, maybe Mom and Dad favored me a little bit," he said, as if admitting to a minor character flaw. "Maybe I got more attention or support. But that doesn't justify stealing my inheritance. That doesn't justify destroying family relationships over money." I stared at my brother, really looked at him, and realized that even after everything that had been revealed, even after months of documentation and evidence, he still couldn't see the situation clearly. He still viewed himself as the victim, still believed that family resources naturally belonged to him, still couldn't comprehend that his lifetime of advantages had been unearned privilege rather than deserved recognition. "Marcus," I said quietly, "this was never your inheritance to steal. This was Grandma Rose's money and she chose to give it to me. The only person who has the right to decide who deserves her money is her. But you don't need it." He exploded, falling back into the same arguments he'd been making for months. "You're fine on your own. You've always been independent. I'm the one with real responsibilities." And that's when I understood the final lesson Grandma Rose had been teaching us all along. Standing in my living room, watching my brother plead for money he'd never earned, while insisting he deserved it more than I did, I finally understood the full scope of what Grandma Rose had orchestrated. This wasn't just about inheritance, it was about revealing fundamental truths about character, entitlement, and family dynamics that had been hidden beneath years of polite pretense. Marcus, I said, sitting down across from him, I need you to really listen to what you're saying. You're telling me that you deserve Grandma's money because you've always gotten family money. You think your history of being favored somehow entitles you to continue being favored forever. That's not, he started, but I held up my hand. Let me finish. You've never once asked why Grandma made this decision. You've never considered whether her reasons might be valid. You've never examined whether the lifetime of advantages you received might have been unfair to me. Your only concern is that you didn't get what you expected to get. I pulled out a folder I'd been carrying since the will, reading copies of some of Grandma Rose's documentation that Mr. Blackwell had shared with me. Do you want to know what she wrote about you in her journal? Not the angry parts, not the disappointed parts, but the hopeful parts. Marcus looked confused, but nodded. I read from one of her entries, Marcus is not a bad person, but he's never been required to develop character because everything has been handed to him. He's never learned empathy because he's never faced real struggle. He's never developed resilience because he's never faced real consequences. The family's favoritism has actually harmed him by preventing him from becoming the person he could have been. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. She wrote that about me, she wrote a lot about both of us. But here's what she wrote about her decision. This inheritance is not punishment for Marcus. It's a chance for him to finally learn what it means to earn something on his own merit. And it's recognition for Serena that she has always deserved but never received. I closed the folder and looked at my brother, really looked at him, for perhaps the first time in my adult life. Marcus, you're 35 years old. You've had every advantage, every opportunity, every safety net. What have you actually built that's entirely your own? The question hung in the air between us. I could see him processing it, running through his achievements, his successes, his accomplishments, and realizing that every single one had been supported, subsidized, or enabled by family resources. I worked hard, he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. You worked hard with every possible advantage, I replied. You worked hard knowing that failure wasn't really possible, because there was always a safety net. You worked hard at goals that were practically guaranteed, because you had every resource needed to achieve them. Something shifted in his expression, not acceptance, not yet, but perhaps the first crack in his lifetime of assumptions about deserving privilege. What am I supposed to do now? He asked, and for the first time in months he sounded like my brother rather than an entitled stranger. You're supposed to do what I've been doing my entire life, I said gently. You figure it out on your own. You use your education, your skills, your experience, and you build something real. Something that's actually yours. The legal challenge was officially dropped 2 weeks later. Marcus's lawyers had finally convinced him that he had no chance of winning and would likely face additional legal fees and court costs if he continued. The inheritance was finalized, and I officially became the recipient of $28.4 million that I still couldn't quite believe was real. But the money, as significant as it was, turned out to be the least important part of what I'd inherited. Grandma Rose had left me detailed letters explaining her investment strategies, her business philosophy, and her hopes for how I would use the wealth she'd built. She'd included contacts for financial advisors, lawyers, and business partners who could help me manage and grow the inheritance responsibly. She'd even suggested specific charitable causes and organizations that she hoped I would support. More importantly, she'd left me a family legacy that was finally honest about its dynamics and dysfunction. The months of legal battles had forced every family member to confront the patterns of favoritism and inequality that had shaped our relationships for decades. Some relationships were damaged beyond repair, but others became stronger and more authentic than they'd ever been. My parents, surprisingly, were among the relationships that improved. The shock of Grandma Rose's decision and the evidence of their differential treatment had forced them to examine their parenting with uncomfortable honesty. They couldn't undo 30 years of favoritism, but they could acknowledge it and work to change their patterns going forward. "We failed you," Dad said during one difficult conversation 6 months after the will reading. "We convinced ourselves that Marcus needed more support because he was more ambitious, more promising, more likely to succeed. We never considered that you might be more promising precisely because you were succeeding without all that support. Marcus and I needed more time to rebuild our relationship, if indeed that was even possible." He eventually moved across the country with Vivian, ostensibly for a new job opportunity, but really to escape the family dynamics that no longer served his interests. We exchanged polite but distant communication like acquaintances rather than siblings. But here's what I learned from the whole experience: Grandma Rose hadn't just given me money, she'd given me validation that my entire life experience had been real. The favoritism I'd observed, the inequality I'd experienced, the sense that I was somehow less worthy of family investment. All of that had been real, documented, and witnessed by someone who loved me enough to do something about it. I used part of the inheritance to pay off my student loans, buy a beautiful house, and establish financial security I'd never dreamed possible. But more importantly, I used it to fund scholarships for overlooked students, support organizations that help young women build careers without family connections, and invest in businesses owned by people who'd had to create their own opportunities. I started a foundation focused on what I called quiet achievers, people who build success through character, persistence, and resilience, rather than privilege and connections. Every year, we fund dozens of scholarships, business loans, and support programs for people who remind me of my younger self, capable, determined, but lacking the safety nets and advantages that smooth the path to success. The foundation's motto, borrowed from one of Grandma Rose's letters, is, "Sometimes the overlooked ones are the ones who deserve to be seen most clearly." 6 months ago, I received a letter from Marcus. He'd been working at his new job without family connections or financial support for the first time in his life. He was struggling learning what it meant to face real consequences and real challenges. But he was also discovering capabilities and resilience he'd never known he possessed. "Serena," he wrote, "I'm starting to understand what Grandma Rose was trying to teach me. I'm starting to understand what you went through all those years. I'm not ready to apologize yet. I'm still too angry and confused and proud, but I wanted you to know that I'm finally learning what it means to earn something on my own merit. And maybe eventually we can be siblings who respect each other, rather than just people who happen to share parents." It wasn't forgiveness and it wasn't reconciliation, but it was recognition. And maybe that was enough. Standing in my new house looking at photos from the foundation's latest scholarship ceremony, I think about Grandma Rose and the extraordinary gift she gave me. Not just financial security, but the knowledge that someone had seen my worth when others couldn't, had documented my struggles when others dismissed them, and had taken action to ensure that justice, even delayed, would eventually arrive. You know what's funny about karma? Sometimes it's not cosmic, sometimes it's just one person who loves you enough to pay attention and brave enough to act on what they see. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's finally getting the recognition and support you deserved all along, and using that gift to help other overlooked people find their own path to success. So here's my question for all of you who've stuck with me through this wild journey. Have you ever been the overlooked sibling, the family afterthought, the one who had to earn everything while watching others get handed advantages? Or maybe you've seen this dynamic play out in families around you. How do you think families should handle fairness when it comes to supporting their children? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And your stories about family dynamics and justice always amaze me. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family drama that proves truth really is stranger than fiction. And please share this with anyone who's ever felt invisible in their own family. Sometimes we all need reminding that being overlooked doesn't mean being less valuable. Thanks for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the quiet ones, the ones who build their strength without fanfare, are the ones who deserve the greatest recognition. Stay strong, keep building your own success, and never let anyone convince you that being independent means being less worthy of love and support. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.